Hello everyone and welcome back to ACER Explained. I'm going through section 3 of the ACER Practice Question booklet, and in this video I'm going through Unit 10. So Unit 10 has questions 24 and 25. As always, we're going to be identifying prereq knowledge, reasoning skills, and some of the bootcamp resources that are available as well. Unit 10 shows us a schematic of something that's trying to represent long function. And the actual question itself, so question 24, is basically asking us which aspect in the schematic is best represented or best representative of a lung. So we have the bell jar, which is the jar that is surrounding the balloon in this case. Then we have the balloon, we have the bell jar and the balloon together, and then we have the bell jar and the diaphragm together. So I'll quickly draw a basic schematic just so that we can see. So we have, this is the bell jar. Okay. We have kind of a stopper here and a straw that's going through. We have a balloon here. Balloon. And then right now the balloon is inflated. So the little rubbery bit here, this is the diaphragm, and it's being pulled downwards. And so you have the balloon expanding. And around the balloon, we have thoracic air. Okay, filling up the space that's being created by the diaphragm there as well. So out of these options, which is most like the lung? Well, you have the second image as well, and in the second one, the balloon is deflated and the diaphragm is kind of returned back to its normal position. And if you think about a lung, and you think about your thoracic space, it's definitely helpful if you have some of that anatomy knowledge. But if you think about your thoracic cage, so your ribs, you have your lungs sitting inside of it, and the lung itself is kind of the organ that is expanding and collapsing, right? Or it's getting air, it's getting filled with air and then deflated as well. And the balloon is what matches this the most. And if you want to extend this schematic to real anatomy, you would say that the bell jar is more the walls of the thorax where the lungs reside. The balloon is the lung itself. The diaphragm is pretty representative of the diaphragm, and the diaphragm controls the amount or the pressure inside the thorax, which results in either inspiration of air, so air coming in, or expiration of air, so air going out. And so in this case, it does help to have that prerequisite knowledge. But if you think about it, the lungs inflate. That's some pretty common knowledge, and they deflate when there's air that's going out of it. If you kind of do the action of breathing, you can infer that. And so the answer here is B, or balloon. So in terms of previous knowledge, it is helpful to have some knowledge of respiration. But it is also important to have the reasoning skills required to answer this question, which is the ability to infer things from visual stimuli or to be able to refer to schematics that simplify biological concepts. And so some bootcamp resources for this include the reasoning skills course, the content in action, specifically the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, as well as the diagrams and visual stimuli acceleration class. Now, question 25 is asking which of the following options, A, B, C, or D, occurs first that leads to the inflation of the balloon. Okay, so the inflation of the balloon is referring to, let me go pointer, this little bit here. So the balloon actually being filled with air. What leads to that? What's the first step? So is the first step A, the amount of air inside the balloon increases. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how respiration works, this seems like a plausible option. But if you use the context clues of the question is asking what leads to the inflation of the balloon. So you can kind of guess that the inflation, or like the amount of air that's increasing inside the balloon, that happens last. That's the last step, and there's things before that that are leading to that. Then you have air pressure inside the balloon decreases. Okay, so if you think about it, if you have reduced pressure inside the balloon, it makes sense for, air to come in. If you have increased pressure anywhere, then it's pushing on the contents. So it's pushing on the air, and air would go out. So this kind of makes sense to come before this, okay? But is it the first thing? Let's look at the other options to figure that out. The amount of thoracic air increases. This is a bit of a trick one, because in the image itself, it looks like the thoracic air is increasing when the diaphragm is pulled like this. But if you think about it, the balloon is inflating as well. So with the volume of the balloon increasing, you can kind of tell that the thoracic air is staying the same. And the reason you can say this confidently as well is because there's the stopper over here. And so air is only going into the balloon through this straw. Air shouldn't be moving in or out of this space. So the thoracic air should remain the same. It shouldn't increase, right? When it looks smaller, the balloon is also deflated. So that means that if you think about it, the air could be the same. And it is the same if you kind of already have that knowledge about respiration. So this one is gone. Then we have the thoracic air pressure decreases. Now, this is also a tricky one. It's kind of easier if you have that knowledge of respiration, because in human respiration, what happens is when the diaphragm stretches to make room, right? When you inspire, the diaphragm depresses first, and that depression of the diaphragm decreases the pressure in the thorax. And that is what leads to the decreased pressure in the lungs as well, because it's being pulled on by this space here. The volume of the lung increases, which means that the pressure decreases, which draws air in. So that's kind of what happens during respiration. That's your main thing that happens, where the diaphragm depresses, which leads to increased lung volume, because the negative pressure of the thoracic air is pulling on the walls of the lungs. And then that leads to decreased pressure. And then that leads to air coming in. So the answer is D. This is what happens first. The first thing that happens is to do with the diaphragm, and it decreases the thoracic air pressure, which pulls on the lung, which increases the volume of the lung. And the volume of the lung increasing means that the pressure decreases, because they're inversely proportional. And then that leads to air being sucked in. And so that's when the amount of air inside the balloon increases. So then the answer is D. This one is pretty tricky to do without your prerequisite knowledge of respiration, but you can kind of infer these things from the visual stimuli. You have the image of the hand pulling the diaphragm as well. So you could even kind of guess that, all right, well, that's probably the first step. That's kind of the action that's being taken in order for the balloon to fill up with air. And so you could answer the question in that way if you were really lost. So you do have those reasoning skills there. And yeah, so the bootcamp resources, same as before. Reasoning skills course, we have the cardiovascular and resp systems content in action, and then the diagrams and visual stimuli acceleration class for this one. So that's it for Unit 10. As always, like, share, and subscribe for more GAMS that help. We love your feedback. And we also have our Instagram at ThankFlipGamSat, as well as our podcast, ThankFlipGamSat Nurses Doing GAMSAT, if you want to hear more from us. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.